So welcome. Good evening. Thanks for coming tonight. This is College Financial Aid. My name is Matt Mulhern. I'm a college financial aid expert. I've been helping families kind of navigate the college process for the last, 10, 11 years. Have had a number of families at West Orange that I've helped guide through the process. So tonight, what I want to do is help you much better understand how the college financial aid process works, right? Look, when it comes to the whole college process in general, there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, right? Perfectly normal, perfectly natural, right? Why? We're talking about your kids and your money, right? Two of the most, sensitive, important topics that exist, so what we want to do here tonight is give you a much better understanding of, how the whole process works from a high level and help you understand how to best position your family moving forward, right? And so look, here's kind of the high level that I'll tell you. A lot of folks think that the financial aid process starts come the fall when you go to sit down to fill out the FAFSA, right? Quite honestly, that's wrong. What you want to do and what you want to understand is that this is what I call front end process, and you want to start to get an understanding of where you fit in from a financial perspective in the financial aid process. And then and this is something that I'll repeat as we go through tonight. Every college is their own business, right? They all do business differently. So the colleges that your son or daughter are interested in, how do they do business, right? What can you expect from them? Now that's easier said than done, but I'm going to give you some tools, some tricks, some strategies to identify that and really help you start to begin to understand how to position yourself. And it really starts with what schools are you applying to, and how to position yourself properly to make sure that you hit the end goal, which in my opinion is best school possible, right? For your son, daughter, your child, for the best value possible, right? Let's marry those two things together, right? That's kind of the goal for everyone, or it should be anyway, right? So that's what I'm going to try to help you kind of start to understand. We'll talk some nuts and bolts, how do you actually fill out the financial aid applications, but assuming that you guys are mostly class of 2024, right? You have 6, 7, 8 months before you have to fill out a single application. Right now, you want to be focused on kind of high level strategy and, really positioning, right? And that all starts with understanding the process. And then, start to build your school list, starting to build a smart school list that makes sense, both from an academic admission, cultural fit, but also from a financial fit, right? Okay, a couple logistical things. This will be recorded, right? So you'll get an email tomorrow with the recording, with the slides, and an opportunity to speak to myself on a one-on-one basis, if you so choose. But that being said, feel free to fire away, ask whatever questions that you do have as we move forward, right? I try to keep this, informative and entertaining, but also fairly concise. So we shouldn't be more than, 3 or 4 hours tonight, right? Kidding, completely kidding, just a joke. No, we'll be like an hour, right? Hour, maybe an hour 10, hour 15 tops. But again, we're going to cover a lot of good information and give you guys a much better understanding of how the whole process works. All right. But that being said, feel free, fire away, use the Q&A, ask whatever questions that you do have. All right, that's me. There's my email, my cell. Feel free to reach out at any time. Like I said, I've been doing this quite a while, 10, 11 years now. So I have a pretty good feel, pretty good understanding of, most family situations, how it works, and really how to best position. Okay. All right. So now kind of starting high level, what is financial aid? There's kind of a lot of misconceptions, misunderstanding of financial aid. Financial aid essentially discount off the sticker price, right? That's all it is. It's a discount off the sticker price. There's actually 3 different types of financial aid that exist. There's need-based aid, there's merit-based scholarships, and then there's self-help aid, right? Self-help aid is this third one here. It's loans, work, study. Obviously, money you either have to work for or pay back in a loan. Self-help aid is what I call the least helpful, right? It's what we're going to spend the least amount of time on tonight. Why? Because like I said, it's the least helpful. Trust me when I tell you, again, assuming most of you guys are class of 24, if not 25, self-help, the loans will be there. You'll be able to take loans as evidenced by, right, the student loan crisis that exists. The loans are there. The loans will be available. Don't focus on loans. What you should be focused on right now is reducing your cost, right? You got to get your cost down as much as you can. And really the 2 vehicles to do that are these other pools of money, need-based financial aid and merit-based scholarships, right? So let's kind of break these 2 down real quick. So merit-based scholarships is all about the student, right? SAT, GPA, extracurriculars, they're an athlete, an artist, a musician, right? Your son or daughter, your child applies to a school. The school says, we like, we like your child, right? We we want to offer them a financial incentive to come to our school, a merit-based scholarship, right? They offer them a merit-based scholarship. That's kind of intuitive. Everyone kind of gets that. Everyone kind of understands that. Now, there's one caveat with merit-based scholarships that a lot of folks are not aware of. There are a lot of schools in the country that do not give merit-based scholarships, right? All the Ivy Leagues, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown, UPenn, right? What we call the NESCAC schools, right? Amherst, Bates, Middlebury, Bowdoin. They don't give merit-based scholarships, right? What they do is the other type of aid is what they call need-based financial aid, right? So where we said merit-based is all about the student, need-based is opposite, where need-based is all about the family, right? And the family's financial profile, income, assets, number of people in the household, etc. Right? So we understand, okay, merit-based, self-help aid, that's loans, we got that. We'll cross that bridge down the road. Merit-based, okay, we understand that. That's pretty intuitive. My son or daughter applies to a school, the school, likes them, they offer them a scholarship. We got that. How about need-based, right? Need-based is much less understood. How do we know if, one, we're going to qualify for need-based financial aid? And if we are, how much are we going to get, right? So let's kind of dive into that now. Let me first start by saying this. And like I tell you guys, I've been doing this a long time. Many families right off the bat, mentally, right, disqualify themselves from need-based financial aid. I can't tell you how many times I talk to mom and dad, and their first line after hello is, we're not going to qualify for need-based financial aid. Most of you, if not all of you, will qualify for need-based financial aid at some schools and not others. In other words, need-based financial aid is not binary. So it's possible, if not likely, that at some schools you get $0 in need-based financial aid, but at other schools you get tens of thousands of dollars in need-based financial aid, right? So don't automatically assume that you're not going to get any need-based financial aid. This process is very, one, school specific, and then two, it's very college specific, right? So if you had twins, right, exact same financial situation, it's possible that one twin, depending on the school they went to, you get $0 in aid. But another twin, depending on the school they went to, they get tens of thousands of dollars. I'm going to show you examples of that, right? So don't automatically assume I'm not going to qualify for need-based aid, right? Because a lot of it depends on what schools we're talking about. So here's the formula that every school in the country uses to determine your family's eligibility for need-based aid, right? So the first thing they do, they take their sticker price, whether it's, $35, $40, $50, $70, $90,000, they're all in cost at that particular school, room, board, tuition, fees, right? That big, scary sticker price. They then subtract what's called your EFC. The EFC stands for the expected family contribution, right? It's an actual dollar amount that is assigned to your family, right? It's basically the minimum amount that the school thinks that you can pay. Guys, if you leave here tonight understanding only one thing, have it be this EFC number. It's that important, right? Again, the EFC is the expected family contribution. For most families, this number dictates how much you pay at a college, right? It's very, very important. And I'm going to tell you that, I'm going to explain to you the details of how that's made up and what you can do to lower that, right? So going back to the formula, they take their sticker price, right? 80,000 bucks. They subtract your family's EFC, and that equals your eligibility for need-based financial aid. Now, another important concept, just because you're eligible for need-based financial aid does not mean that's what you're going to get, right? Why? Because every school is a different business and they all do business differently, right? So again, just because you're eligible for it doesn't mean you're going to get it. Let me give you a quick example, and then I'm going to show you a quick example, right? In terms of need-based financial aid. So let's take Columbia, right? Elite private school, New York City. Sticker price, call it 80,000, probably a little bit more, but for round number's sake, let's call it $80,000 all in cost, right? Crazy number, unbelievable, right? $80,000. So the sticker price is 80,000. For this hypothetical family, their EFC is 30,000, right? So Columbia goes 80 minus 30. So at Columbia, you're eligible for $50,000 in need-based financial aid, right? Columbia is going to give that family $50,000 in grant money, right? Because they meet 100% of need-based financial aid. They're going to give them all $50,000 that they're eligible for, right? Why? Because Columbia meets 100% of need-based financial aid. They do not give merit scholarships, but they meet 100% of need-based aid. So at Columbia, this family is going to get $50,000 in need-based aid grant money. Let's take Penn State, right? Very popular out-of-state public school. Again, this is not to vilify Penn State, but I want you to understand how they do business. So Penn State sticker price out of state, 60,000, right? They take 60,000, they subtract your EFC, which again is 30,000. They go 60 minus 30. So at Penn State, you're eligible for $30,000 in need-based financial aid, right? Grant money. How much is Penn State going to give you? We said Columbia is going to give you 50,000. How much is Penn State going to give this family? Zero, right? They're not going to give them any need-based financial aid. Why? Because that's how Penn State does business. Like most big public schools, they do not give any need-based financial aid, right? So in this scenario, we have a family that at Columbia is getting $50,000 in need-based financial aid at Columbia and $0 in need-based financial aid at Penn State, right? Why? Because understand, every college is a different business. They all do business differently. So again, this family is very, this process is very family specific, right? What's your EFC? Very important. And then it's very school specific or college specific. How are the colleges that you are applying to do business, right? So hopefully we get an understanding now of how this equation works. So like I said, I've been doing this presentation, some version of it for over 10 years. And the questions that a lot of times arise at this point are two, right? One, how do I know my EFC, right? How do I figure out my EFC? And two, how do I know the schools that I'm interested in, or my son, my daughter, my child are interested in? How do I know how they do business, right? How am I supposed to know that Penn State doesn't give any grant money, right? But honestly, you're not, right? And that's why there's a student loan crisis in the country, to be honest with you. But to answer those two questions, we basically created our own software, right? To answer those two questions, amongst other things, but that's, the primary drivers of the software, right? So when you registered, you were able to create a free account. Feel free to create one. If you don't want to, that's completely fine as well. But what the software does, and if I forget to share my screen, give me a heads up. Sometimes I forget. What the software does, and what you can do tonight, is start to get an idea of what your family's EFC is, right? And then what does that mean at specific schools? So as you can see, if you quickly look at these schools, the sticker price a lot of the times doesn't matter, right? Or I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, is the least important factor in terms of what you actually pay. The more important factors are, one, what's your EFC up here? And then two, how does that school do business, right? So you look at Columbia, right? $86,000 sticker price for this family because of their EFC, right? Their EFC is 19,000. They're going to pay $24,000 a year at Columbia, right? Why? Because Columbia meets 100% of need-based financial aid. Well, how about Penn State, right? Penn State, this family's EFC is 19,000. Penn State sticker price is 60. So 60 minus 19, they're eligible for $41,000 in grant money. How much is Penn State going to give them? Zero, right? Zero. Why? Because that's how Penn State does business, right? So the $86,000 Columbia for this family is a third of the price of $60,000 Penn State, right? How about in-state Rutgers? Okay, you get basically the New Jersey sticker price, but for this family, compared against the $85,000 Syracuse, they're going to pay the same price as they would at Rutgers, right? In-state. Why? Because how Syracuse gives need-based financial aid, right? So again, what you should be doing now, specifically class of 24, even class of 25, start to get an idea of what your family's EFC is, right? Because this EFC is going to be the most important factor of how much money these schools give you. No, but some schools, no matter what your EFC is, like Penn State, a lot of times Rutgers, we'll talk about Rutgers specifically though, but an out-of-state Penn State, even though I only have a $19,000 EFC, I'm not getting any aid there, right? Why? It's not about me, it's about Penn State, how they do business, right? So hopefully you get an idea now of, again, how important, understanding what your EFC is going to be, and then, how the schools you're interested in, how they do business, right? So if you start to understand, this financial aid equation, you start to understand, the lower you can get your EFC, the better off you are, right? And so if anyone has any questions about EFCs, feel free, fire away, ask in the Q&A, happy to answer. So now what do we want to know about our EFC? So now I'm going to talk specifically about assets here, right? We're going to talk all about assets. The next slide, I'm going to talk about income, but right here, we're going to talk about assets, right? So I'm going to start here. Parent assets versus student assets. This is a mistake I see all the time. Don't make it, all right? When you go to fill out your financial aid applications, don't make this most common. Let me start here, actually. When it comes to assets, assets are reported day of, meaning you report your assets as they exist when you sit down to do your financial aid applications. So you're not going to do them till the fall. You have plenty of time, if necessary, to make some moves, right? That's first and foremost. Income's going to be different, but assets are reported day of. So that's first. Okay, parent assets versus student assets. So ideally, when you go to sit down to do your financial aid applications, you don't have any assets in the student's name. I'll say it again. Ideally, when you sit down to do your financial aid applications, you don't have any assets in the student's name, right? Why? Because student assets are factored into the EFC at a higher percentage than parent assets. In other words, $50,000, or it doesn't matter the number, $20,000 in student assets will increase your EFC much more than $20,000 in parent assets, right? 9 times out of 10, you don't even have to do anything. You just have to understand the rule. So if your son or daughter has $10, $15, $20,000 in a local checking your savings, right? They saved up from a summer job, their bar mitzvah, birthdays, graduation, whatever. That money, that account, 9 times out of 10 has your name and social on it as a parent, right? If your name and social is on that account as a parent, it is your asset and should be reported as your asset on the financial aid applications, right? It is not the student asset, it is the parent's asset. And again, that's what you want. Why? Because parent assets are factored into your EFC at a much lower percentage than student assets. How about 529s, right? 529s. And guys, I literally had a Zoom an hour ago where this family made this exact mistake. 529s. They saved up, they saved $50,000. This is exactly what happened, right? They saved $50,000 in their 529. They went to go fill out their FAFSA. They reported that 529 as a student asset, right? Wrong. That's not how it's supposed to be reported. Every 529, every single one, by rule, a 529 is a parent asset, not a student asset, right? And that's how you report it. If you report that 529 as a student asset, not only are you incorrectly filling out the form, you are inadvertently driving up your own EFC, right? So 529s, you want to make sure you report them correctly as a parental asset, right? Don't increase your EFC inadvertently. Them reporting their $50,000 as a student asset increased their EFC about $8,000, right? It costs them $8,000 in grant money at the schools they were looking at, right? Multiply that by 4. That's tens of thousands of dollars over 4 years for that simple mistake. Don't do that, right? Don't do that. How about here? And so sometimes families ask, all right, what is a student asset? If you have an UTMA or an UGMA, that is considered a student asset. That may be a problem for some families if you are in that situation. You do have options at this point in the process. I recommend, talking with myself and kind of understanding, understanding what options you do have. Question, can I report a 529 as a parent asset, even if it has my child's name on it? Again, every single 529 is set up the same way. The student is the beneficiary of the 529. The parent is the custodian. It's the parent's asset. That's the rule, right? That's the rule. That's how it's reported. The parent is the custodian of the account, right? Every single 529 is the same. They all have a beneficiary, the student, but that's not whose asset it is. It's the custodian's asset, right? The parent. Yeah, okay, very good. So that's how it's reported. Okay, what's considered an asset, right? What's considered an asset? So this is everything but, right? Everything but. So everything but your retirement account, right? So your retirement account is off the table. Your 401k, your 403b, your Roth IRA, right? Those are all off the table. they do not count to the 529 I'm sorry, they do not count to the EFC calculations. Your retirement accounts do not go on the FAFSA, right? Your retirement accounts do not go on the FAFSA, right? Plain and simple. If you put them on the FAFSA, every school will count them against you, right? Make sure you don't make that mistake. But by rule, your retirement accounts are not a factor. What is considered? Basically anything else liquid, right? Stocks, bonds, checking, savings, brokerage account, anything of that nature. We'll talk about houses in a second, but anything else liquid is. So that's, again, major mistake that is made every year. Families put their retirement accounts as investments. Don't do that, right? Those do not count. Is debt considered, right? Is debt considered? Short answer to that is no. Debt is not considered. You have consumer debt. Matt, we live in New Jersey. Our property taxes are through the roof. Our cost of living is through the roof. I have 2 kids, 2 car payments. Unfortunately, none of that. Cost of living is not factored in. And any kind of consumer debt is not factored in. No school in the country will take that into consideration. Some things they will take into consideration. Firstly, let me first say, if you ever filled out a FAFSA before, there's no room for context or circumstance or situation. So if you do have any mitigating circumstances, you want a financial aid, you do want the school to be aware of, you have to go out of your way to let them know. So what about unexpected medical expenses? Absolutely. That is something a school will take into account, but you'll see there's no room for it on the FAFSA. So if you have significant unreimbursed medical expenses, you have to, that's basically what I call a back-end process, right? So your son or daughter, your child has to get admitted, you get your award, then you can go through an appeal process, right? And let them know what these medical expenses actually are, and see if they'll take them into account. Most schools will, occasionally they won't, but if you don't tell them, they definitely won't. But again, understand that it's up to you. The onus is on you to go to each individual financial aid office and let them know about it, all right? But yes, medical expenses are absolutely something they'll take into account. If you care for an elderly parent, I've had clients before that had special needs children. I have a client right now. We're doing an appeal at University of Michigan. Dad has cancer, right? Again, that's not anything that's going to be factored in initially. That's up to you to go back to the school and appeal, right, and let them know what the actual situation is, right? And then houses, right? Home value. So this one's a little bit tricky. So pay attention here. Specifically, 1, if you own your own home or any property, and 2, if you're applying to private schools, right? So now there's basically 2 main financial aid forms. There's the FAFSA, and then there's also what's called the CSS profile, right? The FAFSA and the CSS profile. The FAFSA is required by every school in the country. The FAFSA will not ask about your primary residence, right? The house that you live in does not matter, is not accounted for on the FAFSA, right? It's off the table. However, there's 200 private schools in the country, right? The name brand private schools, the Columbias, the Syracuses, the Northeasterns, Northwesterns, Boston U's, right? Villanovas, that in addition to the FAFSA, they require an additional financial aid application called the CSS profile. CSS profile is a much more in-depth financial aid questionnaire. One of the main differences is that they are going to ask about your house, right? So if you're applying to one of these private schools and you own your own home, they're going to ask you 4 questions about your house. How much you paid for it, what year you bought it, and then the 2 important ones, how much is it worth now and how much you owe on it, right? What they are looking at, these private schools, is home equity, the difference between what your house is worth and how much you owe on it, right? That difference is called home equity. So hypothetically, my house is worth, so I'm applying to Syracuse or Drexel or Villanova, right? So now this applies to me. So my home is worth, again, hypothetically, my home is worth 500,000, right? I owe 200 on it, right? 500 minus 200, I have $300,000 in home equity. These private schools count that home equity the same way they count any other asset, 529, cash, whatever, right? I get it, it's not fair, especially in this part of the country, it's not, but that's their businesses, right? These colleges are businesses, so they're not trying to do you any favors, right? Believe that. so they do count your home equity. Now, what is, how do you mitigate? Firstly, how do you value your home, right? Um, Subjective, right? There's subjectivity in the valuation. So we recommend, right, subscribing to what we call the IRS quick sale rule. What is that? So let's say, my house is fair market value 500,000. The IRS has a quick sale rule that states if I had to turn around and sell my house tomorrow under duress for whatever reason, I might not receive fair market value, right? I might receive 20% less than fair market value. So we have subscribed to using that valuation on the CSS profile, right? So instead of valuing my house worth 500, I'm going to say it's worth 20% less. So I'm going to say it's worth 400 instead of 500. And then instead of showing $300,000 in equity, I would actually only be showing $200,000 in equity, right? So I decrease my home equity by $100,000. That's like taking $100,000 in cash out of the equation, right? It's significant. And a lot of these private schools, that's literally thousands of dollars in grant money that you would receive otherwise, right? And multiply that by 4, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars just by, valuing your house using this rule, right? So again, what's the whole point of this? You want to show as little equity as possible to keep your EFC as low as possible, right? To put yourself in position to get as much grant money as possible. So if you have an investment property or second home, again, they're not concerned with your cash flow or your Airbnb income. That's part of your income. Any real estate that you own, they're focused and they're on equity, right? They're looking at home equity. So you can use this rule for any property or real estate that you do own. Now, real quickly, going back to the software, I want to show you guys something as terms of how that actually plays out, right? So when we look, there's actually 3 different types of EFCs. There's the federal EFC, little mnemonic device, right? FAFSA federal, right? There's the federal EFC. That's only the FAFSA. And like I told you, the FAFSA doesn't care about your house, right? But then you have the institutional EFC, which is going to be used by schools like Columbia and Syracuse and Drexel and Villanova and University of Miami, right? The private schools. Why is this 19 and this is 27,000? Because these institutional schools require the CSS profile, and this 27,000 factors in your home equity, right? That's why this is 19 and this is 27, right? Now, there's also the third consensus EFC. It's used by about 33 schools in the country, Princeton, MIT, a lot of the elite schools. Most of you are going to be concerned and focused on these 2 EFCs, the federal, which is the FAFSA only, and then the institutional, which is the CSS profile. Again, this is 19 and this is 27,000 because the home equity for this family increases the institutional EFC here, right? So again, the less home equity you show, the lower this institutional EFC will be at schools like Columbia and Syracuse, right? So that's how houses come into play, right? So that's our asset portion, right? Any other questions with assets, feel free. Now we're going to talk about income, right? Income. So the first thing that you want to be aware of when it comes to income is what is your base income year, meaning which tax year does the school use? So it's always 2 years behind. So assuming most of you guys are class of 2024, they are going to require you to use your 2022 tax return. For better or worse, you don't get a choice. You have to use 22. Again, if 22 is an aberration where it's especially good for whatever reason, you do have a chance to appeal, right? But again, just like the medical expenses, that comes at the end, right? You have to use 22, right? You don't get a choice. The income line they're concerned about is line 11, the AGI, right? The adjusted gross income. That's the line that they're concerned about. That's the main income line. So again, you guys could take your 22 tax return, open a MyCap account and get your EFC tonight, right? If you so choose. The student income allowance, don't confuse student income and student assets. So any asset you show in the student's name is going to increase your EFC. However, students have an income allowance, right? So the student income allowance is $7,000. So anything that the student made in tax year 2022, $7,000 or less will not count against you. right? It will not increase your EFC. Once you cross that $7,000 threshold, well, then it starts to count significantly, right? Now, question that arises a lot of time here, do we have to do this every year, right? Do we have to fill out the financial aid applications every year? Yes, you do. However, let me give you some inside baseball. The first year is the most important, right? All these schools have budgets. So let's say my family goes to Syracuse. Syracuse gives my family whatever, $40,000 in grant money, need-based aid. Syracuse basically says, okay, we expect to give the Mulhern family $40,000 for the next 3 years or over the next 4 years, every year, right? That's the expectation. You do have to fill out the financial aid applications because things do change, right? Positively or negatively, and the school can adjust an award, right? More or less. But it's imperative that you get as much as possible first year. Why? Because that basically sets your baseline, right? Again, they expect to give you, they don't give you anything the first year. They don't expect to give you anything the subsequent years. Again, can they? Yes, but it's a lot harder to go back and get after the fact, right? Or in subsequent years, you have to try to maximize the amount of aid you receive that first year, right? Very important. Also, too, when you do the financial aid in subsequent years, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more straightforward. You're only dealing with one school instead of, 10, 12, 15. So it's not as big a burden. But short answer, yes, you have to do it every year because things do change, right? Positively or negative. So that's income, right? That's income. All right, the $7,000 student allowance. So in tax year 2022, right? If your son or daughter filed taxes and made less than $7,000, then it won't affect anything, right? It won't affect your EFC. It won't change any of your financial aid. If your son or daughter made more than $7,000, once you cross that say your son or daughter made, whatever, 15,000, right? Well, that $8,000 is going to count into your EFC, right? The $7,000 is protected, but once you cross that $7,000 threshold, they're going to factor that $8,000 or whatever the number is into your EFC. And that will happen for all 4 years. So sometimes I've had families where the student, works and works for a job, and basically they're making money, but that's just reducing the amount of aid they're receiving from a school, right? So again, 22 is in the books for the most part, and I'll never tell anyone not to make money, right? If your kid's working and making money, great. But be aware, once they cross that $7,000 threshold, it does factor into the EFC, right? So it's something you want to be aware of. If, either in 22, they made money, or next year, right, you get a significant amount of grant money, and then they go get a great part-time job or whatever. If you're making, serious money, that might just come right out of the grant money that the school gives you, right? So, it's something to just understand and be aware of. No, Maxine, that is not an asset, right? Assets are their own entity. Income, this is income, right? So don't confuse income and assets. Any asset, if your student shows $3,000 in assets, that will count, right? But income is just what they show on your 2022 taxes. So don't confuse income and assets. It's perfectly reasonable. Understand it happens a lot, but income and assets are two different, right? Any amount of money you show as a student asset will increase your EFC, right? But student income, they're allowed to make $7,000 or less. Once you cross $7,000 in income, then it starts to count, right? All right, so that's income. Okay, how about if you won't qualify for need-based financial aid, right? So I'm sure there's some folks that are watching live tonight that'll watch this recording, which again will be sent to you as long as you're registered, that no matter what you do, you're not going to get your EFC low enough to qualify for any need-based financial aid, right? In other words, this, and again, let me reiterate, I know some people just joined, it's perfectly likely, or it's reasonable to expect that at some schools you do get need-based financial aid and others you don't. And again, don't automatically assume that you're not going to get any need-based financial aid. I have parents do that all the time. And honestly, most times they're wrong. Sometimes you're going to be right. So here's the best way to do it. You put your info in. If this EFC number, right, if this is $100,000, let's say, well, then you know that you're not going to get any need-based financial aid, right? But even if this number was 50,000 and you're applying to a school like Columbia, right? They would still potentially give you $30,000 in grant money, right? So depending on the schools you're looking at, you could get this EFC pretty high and still get some need-based financial aid, right? So again, don't automatically disqualify yourself, I'm telling you. But let's say that this EFC for a family is 100,000. What does that mean? You're not going to get any need-based financial aid because the EFC exceeds the cost of attendance, right? So the first thing that you have to do is understand that. Oops, skip. The first thing that you have to that you want to do is understand that your EFC is above the cost of attendance at every school, right? I talked to a mom the other day, you know, they made $1.2 million. Okay, they're not getting any need-based financial aid, right? Step one is understanding that. Step two then is understanding that a lot of schools do not give merit and only give need-based aid. So when I talk to this mom, and this is a conversation I have often, right? They said, we're looking at, you know, Harvard, Yale, Vanderbilt, Notre Dame. I told them with almost 100% certainty, every school that you are looking at is not going to give you a dime. Why? Because those schools only give need-based financial aid. If you want a discount for college and your EFC is very high, then you have to go to that other pool of money, merit money. But again, you have to understand that not every school gives merit scholarships, right? Princeton, Harvard, Yale, all the Ivy Leagues, you can see down here, right? The Ivy Leagues do not give merit. The NESCAC schools do not give merit, right? The NESCAC schools are like Amherst, Bates, Middlebury, Colby, right? They don't give merit, right? So that's first and foremost is understand. First, you want to understand that your EFC is above the cost of attendance, and then the schools that you're interested in, what are they, how do they do business, right? And then if you want a discount for college, you have to find schools that give merit scholarships, right? Easier said than done. How do you know who gives merit? It's tough to kind of sort through. Again, you can use our tool to figure out. So, we look at a school like Syracuse, you click on Syracuse, you scroll down, and here it gives you the stats, right? You click on financial aid at Syracuse, they meet 97% of need-based financial aid, very strong. They give merit awards to over a quarter of their admitted students, right? Actually, Syracuse is pretty good with merit. So you can scroll down and you can see the different types of merit awards that Syracuse does give, right? So, and listen, merit awards are tougher to judge. They're not gospel, but one, you want to understand, yes, the school does give merit, to what level? And then two, what are the potential ranges of merit awards that your son or daughter might get? And remember, merit awards are all about the student's academic profile. But just to illustrate that point, if you click on a school like Columbia, right, you come down here, they meet 100% of need-based aid, merit not reported. Why? Because they don't give merit, right? You can't get a merit scholarship at Columbia. They don't exist, right? So, you have to identify schools that actually do give merit, right? And like I said at the beginning, this process is a front-end process, meaning the most important factor for most families in terms of how much you're actually going to pay for college is what schools you apply to, right? You have to understand what's your EFC, and then what are the schools that will give you money. If it's need-based aid, great, then you want to apply to those type schools. If you're not going to get any need-based aid, then you have to apply to schools that will give merit money, right? The other type of schools you want to look at are what we call value schools, meaning they're kind of on the lower end of the tuition spectrum. So instead of paying, $85,000 at, Vanderbilt, you look at a James Madison, right? Basically all in cost of $42,000. That's over $40,000 a year. Multiply that by 4, that's $160,000, right? That's real money, So understand that every school has a different business model. You can always find a discount regardless of your finances. You just have to apply to schools that will give you money. And here's the last thing I'll say. Most families that I speak with that have an EFC, 80, 90, 100,000, just because their EFC is that amount does not mean that they're in a position to start writing checks for, $80,000 a year for college. Most families cannot do that. So just because your EFC is on the high end, it doesn't mean you have to pay $85,000 a year. What it does mean is that you have to apply to schools that will give your son or daughter merit scholarships, right? And what you really have to understand is that not every school gives merit, okay? A little bit more about merit, right? What do you want to know? Firstly, usually merit is good for 4 years. We said the need-based financial aid changes potentially year to year, but the merit is kind of locked in over 4 years. And like I said at the outset, a merit scholarship is an enticement for your son or daughter to go to that school, right? It's a financial incentive to go to that school. They're trying to entice that kid to go to the school, right? Based on, grades, test scores, extracurriculars, athletics, artists, musicians, etc. Right? It's based on the student profile. Different schools weigh different things. So again, I can't stress enough. Every school's their own business. They all do business differently, right? Rutgers and Columbia are both colleges, but outside of that, they do business completely differently, right? Syracuse and Penn State, obviously, right? They're both colleges, but they do business completely differently. They award money completely differently, right? So again, understand that every school's its own business. So again, kind of sampling here of understanding schools that lean more heavily into need or exclusively in need, and schools that lean more heavily into merit, right? So on the right-hand side are need-based aid schools. Massachusetts, MIT, Harvard, they only give need-based financial aid, right? You can't get a merit scholarship to one of these schools, right? Let me see the question. Good question. I'll get back to that. All right, MIT and Harvard are need-based aid schools only, right? Northwestern, Notre Dame, schools like, Emory, BC, Johns Hopkins, Duke, do they give merit? Some of those, like I talked to a mom a couple of days ago, they're looking at BC. Does BC give merit? Yes, technically, but BC gives merit to 2% of their admitted students. So for all intents and purposes, they basically don't give any merit, right? And that includes athletes. Why? Because they meet 100% of need-based financial aid. That's where all of their resources go, right? So those, Northwestern and Notre Dame, the same. Do they give merit? Technically, yes, but basically no, right? All of their resources go towards meeting 100% of need-based financial aid. But you could always find a school, regardless of your family's finances, that will give the student merit-based aid, right? Kind of random sampling here. Willamette, right, in the Pacific Northwest. Case Western, great school in Ohio. Denison, the Midwest. Kenyon, Oberlin, right? University of Alabama, right? Roll Tide, big Southern school, has given a ton of what we call out-of-state offsets to a lot of Northeast New Jersey families, where basically you're paying room and board only, whatever it is, $15,000, $18,000 a year. So again, I cannot stress this enough. It's a very family-specific process. What's your family's EFC? And then it's a very school-specific process. The schools that you're applying to, how do they do business, right? So when do you start applying for financial aid? We'll tackle that in a second. All right, so FYI, there's a lot of class of 2024, there's big changes coming down for the FAFSA, right? There's big changes coming. One of the changes, to answer the last question, when you start applying, the FAFSA, and let me fast forward, I'm going to come back to this. The FAFSA was almost always available for like the last decade on October 1st. However, it just came out 2 weeks ago that the FAFSA for the class of 2024 is not available until December, right? So the financial aid FAFSA will not become available until December. I don't know how that's going to work with early decision, right? Early decision, usually apply by November 1st or 15th, and then you find out December 15th if the FAFSA is not available until December. I'm not sure how that's going to work. It's kind of up in the air. Class of 2024, congratulations, you guys are the guinea pigs to some degree, right? But so usually the FAFSA is available October 1st. For the class of 2024, it will not be available until December, right? So be aware of that. So going back to the changes, again, that's one of the main changes that are coming. It's going to be available 2 months later. Some of the pros, I'm not going to go through these one by one, but you could read them. One of the big ones is that pre-tax contributions are no longer considered. So your 500,000 or however much you have in a 401k, that was never on the table. But say in tax year 2022, you made a $15,000 pre-tax contribution. That $15,000 used to be added back on as income. That no longer is going to apply, right? So any pre-tax contributions that you make are off the table. I have a lot of cops and firemen who are clients. They, if they get, some of them, get hurt in the line of duty, so they get tax-free disability pensions. Those used to count. Moving forward, those will no longer count, right? So any pre-tax contributions are off the table. So those are some of the pros. One of the biggest cons, and you might have heard this, families with multiple children in school at the same time no longer get a discount, right? They no longer get a discount. It's a terrible rule change. It's terrible. And in this era of we want to make college more affordable, this change is going to make it more expensive for families with multiple kids in college. So let me just quickly explain that, how it used to work. Say, you had twins, right? And your EFC would have been $30,000, but you have two in college at the same time. So basically they split the EFC in half. So instead of your EFC being 30,000, they would say half goes to one kid, half goes to the other, right? $15,000 to one, $15,000 to the other, right? Huge advantage. You get a huge reduction in your EFC. That's going away. It's not fair. It stinks. It's a terrible rule. However, it's a little more nuanced than that. Going back here to our software, at the schools that require this CSS profile, Columbia, Syracuse, any school that uses this institutional methodology will still give you credit for having two kids in college at the same time, right? So if they use the federal method, just the FAFSA only, you will not get credit for two kids in college. But if they use the institutional methodology to calculate the EFC, you will get credit for having two kids in college. So theoretically, if you have twins, right, you can have one kid at a college that doesn't split your EFC. That's 30, the family's EFC is 30,000 at one school and $15,000 at another, right, depending on the school. So if you have multiple kids in college, consult with me and I'll kind of let you know what's what. I'm going to talk about divorce separated families in a second. So again, does become available till December. They're still going to use 2022 for your base income year. Don't miss deadlines, right? Deadlines, very, very important. Okay, I talked about the FAFSA. There's also the CSS profile, right? The CSS profile is, a much more in-depth financial aid questionnaire. It's required by about 200 colleges in the country. Again, mostly private schools, kind of mostly the name brand private schools. They treat home equity as a liquid asset. It's much more invasive, much more complex. However, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because going back like Columbia, Syracuse, they require the CSS profile, but they're much more generous with need-based financial aid, right? So a little double-edged sword there. Divorce business owners, if you are an LLC, a pass-through, small business owner, right? Sole proprietor, whatever the case may be, the CSS profile dives much more deeply into your business, right? The FAFSA was pretty straightforward with business owners. The CSS profile is going to want a lot more information for business owners. If you're in that boat, it's like doing your taxes, right? How you fill out those forms and financial aid applications is vitally important to how those schools view your business. All right, so divorce separated situations. This one gets tricky sometimes too. So firstly, divorce separated situations, the legality of your divorce or separation is irrelevant, right? So whether you're legally divorced or not does not matter, right? What they are looking at, or what they can basically, if both biological parents are maintaining two separate households, you are for financial aid purposes in a divorce separated situation, right? So that's first. That's kind of, and I'm playing around with the screens here. Let me get back to it. So in divorce separated situations, if both biological parents maintain two separate households, you are in the divorce separated bucket, okay? Now, on the FAFSA in a divorce separated situation only requires one parent's financial information, right? Only one parent's financial information. It used to be who is the custodial parent, meaning who does the kid live with 51% or more of the time. It's changing to who provides more financial support for the child. I'll be honest with you, that's ambiguous. There's a gray area there, which quite honestly, in divorce separated situations, you can take advantage of, right? So again, divorce situations or separated situations, only one parent's information goes on the FAFSA. However, the CSS profile is going to require the NCP, what they call the non-custodial parent application. So the FAFSA is only going to be one parent. If the school requires the CSS profile, they're going to want the custodial parent and the non-custodial parent. They want both of their information. Both of their information will be factored into the EFC, right? If you're in a divorce separated situation, again, I highly recommend you speak with me. I'll drop the link in the chat. You can take advantage of a free 20-minute consultation. I recommend all of you talking to me, but specifically small business owners, divorce separated situations, there's some, there's some do's and don'ts within your specific situation that, again, quite frankly, you could take advantage of. All right. Like I talked about, they are changing the split EFC rule. It's a bad rule. So we created a change.org petition. I encourage all of you, and specifically anyone who's going to be affected by it, to sign and share it. And honestly, if you are going to be affected by it, call your congressman, right? And tell them that, listen, this rule hasn't taken effect yet, so families don't understand really the amount of money this is potentially going to cost them in terms of paying more for college. I don't think a lot of the politicians, the Department of Education, understand this, but it's going to, right? It absolutely is. So, sign and share the petition. All right, almost done here, guys. A couple more slides and we're out of here, right on schedule here, time-wise. So you can go through an appeal process, right? And we highly recommend everyone appeals. There's really no downside most of the time. Let me give you a quick timeline of events. So, September, October, November, December, you're doing your admissions applications and simultaneously doing your financial aid applications. That's another point. You do the financial aid applications at the same time that you do your admissions. You don't wait to get admitted and then do the financial aid, right? You do them at the same time. So, come September, October, November, December, you're doing the admissions, you're doing the financial aid. December, January, February, March, you start getting your admissions letters, your financial aid packages. May 1st, which we're 5 or 6 days away from now, is kind of the one universal deadline for seniors, right? Where you basically have to say, this is where I'm going, right? In between when you get your award and when you have to commit, you can go through an appeal process, right? We talked about this to some degree. This is basically, and some people say, well, if I appeal, are they going to say I can't go there anymore? No, right? You're just going back. You're trying to get more money. Listen, every family can and should appeal almost, 90% of the time. Every family, quite honestly, is going to have a different strategy to do that. High level, here's kind of a 5-point, 6-point plan of attack that you kind of can implement. Again, it's going to be family specific, but here's kind of a high level plan of attack that we've utilized, for over a decade. The first one is bring some background, bring some color to your story. What you want to understand is that your file right now is sitting in the financial aid office, right? No one's read your daughter's essay. No one has any idea it's your child's dream school, that your son's wanted to go there since he was 4. They don't know any of that, right? So put a face to a name, as I like to say. Let them know who you are. Going back to the person that asked about medical expenses, this is where you can let them know any mitigating circumstances that your family may have, right? And again, you have to address each individual financial aid office. There's no one-stop shop. Any school that they got admitted to that you'd like to appeal, you have to go and address their individual aid office, right? The second and third, ask for a specific amount, show awards offered by other college. I always use this as an example. Firstly, again, like I've said, colleges are businesses and they're competing for the same product, right? The product being the student. Colleges absolutely compete with each other. So you want to build a list of schools that naturally compete with each other. Let me give you an example, right? Northeastern is competing with Boston University, right? The example I like to use, Sacred Heart, Fairfield, Quinnipiac. Those 3 schools are competing for the same type of students, right? So you go back, Fairfield's your number 1 choice. Sacred Heart offered you $7,000 more. You say, listen, Sacred Heart, Fairfield, you're our number 1 choice. Fairfield, Sacred Heart offered us $7,000 more, right? Can you match that, right? Basically, you leverage a stronger award by a competing school to get more money out of your top choice, right? And you actually show that award that the other school offered you. Fourth, consider expenses not on your taxes. This is mostly for small business or self-employed families. I'll give you a quick example I saw this year. Dad owned his own construction company, and he deducted his pickup truck on his taxes, right? Well, the school said, well, we think you're using that pickup truck to drive the kids to school, take them to soccer. We're actually going to disallow that deduction and add that back on as untaxed income, right? Their EFC increased dramatically. How would they know? How would anyone know that a school does this? Thankfully for them, they were a client of mine. I was involved. I figured it out. We went back to the school. We said, we challenged them on that. Basically, that's ridiculous. As soon as they were challenged on it, they rescinded it. They, removed that truck and dropped the family's EFC. It resulted in like $7,000 more in grant money, right? So it's a significant amount of money. And the last one is kind of be persistent, right? Be persistent. You don't want to be rude, but, don't take no for an answer type deal. A lot of the times I had a mom 2 years ago. She was in a divorce situation. It was complicated, a lot of moving parts. She did the initial appeal, or we did the initial appeal, right? They were looking at a $50,000 price tag at Syracuse. We did the initial appeal. They dropped the cost by $3,000, right? They gave them $3,000 more. It was not enough for this family to attend Syracuse. We went back and back and back. I'm not exaggerating, 7 or 8 times. We got to the vice president of financial aid, explained the story. Basically, they took the initial award from $50,000 down to $25,000, right? We just basically beat them into submission, right? And just kept going back and back and back until they heard the story. And that's probably an aberration in terms of the amount of money you get in appeal. But, it basically allowed that kid to be able to go to Syracuse when otherwise he wouldn't have been able to, right? All right, let me just check the questions. If you already submitted the FAFSA, can it be edited? Yes, you can edit the FAFSA. So I'm assuming, Jackie, that your class of 2023, I'd book a consult. You could talk to me. I would do it ASAP, or shoot me an email, because you don't have much time to do that. Yes, you can edit it, but you're going to have to do an appeal at the specific schools. They're not going to just take your FAFSA changes and correct an award. All right. All right, guys, so what should you be doing now, right? What are the next steps? Again, it seems like it's far off. Well, the FAFSA is not available to December. There's nothing to do. Not true, right? Hopefully you get the idea of how important understanding your EFC, and then what schools you applying to, right? You have to apply to schools that will give your son or daughter money. And again, easier said than done. The toughest part of this process is getting, a school list that makes sense financially and that your son or daughter, your child is super excited about, but that also makes sense financially, right? And marrying those two things. That's the heavy lifting. That's the hard part. But that's what you really should be spending the next 6 months doing, is, putting a list of schools together that makes sense, both admissions wise, academically, and financially, right? Make sure that the finances, while they don't have to be the end all be all, they are part of the equation, right? Do not put your son or daughter or yourself in a position where you're taking on massive student loans, right? Don't do that to yourself. Too many people don't become part of the problem. And really the best way to do that is through education and by preparation. And hopefully tonight you have a much better understanding of, how the whole process works, and, how to start positioning yourself to make sure that your son or daughter gets to a great school for, a really strong price, right? So because you guys came out tonight, we really appreciate it. Again, in the chat, I'm going to drop the, and I'll put it in the Q&A. I'm going to drop my meeting link, so you can feel free to book a free 20-minute conversation with myself. We could talk about your specific family, any questions that you have, and I'll, help you on your journey here and preparing for the financial aid. Just FYI, that link's good for about a month. If you need more time, the link's going to expire, but, shoot me an email. I'm happy to work with you. So take us up on that offer. Again, we do that. If you go to our website, you'll see there's no opportunity to book a free consultation. That's only offered to you guys. because we appreciate you guys coming out tonight and the relationship with your high school. And then the other thing I'll just put on your radar, we do offer one-on-one coaching programs if you need some individual hand-holding as you navigate the college process. Again, we could talk more about that, but just put that on your radar. So guys, hopefully tonight, like I said, you have a much better understanding of how the whole college financial aid process works and how to, utilize this next 6, 7, 8 months wisely in terms of understanding where you are financially or how the colleges will view your family financially. And then, how to, start to properly position yourself in terms of applying to schools that will give your family either need-based aid or merit-based scholarships, or sometimes both, right? So hope to, thanks once again for coming out tonight. Hope to speak to all of you guys. No matter what, I wish you all the best, right? So I'll come back to the questions for a couple minutes. So 529s, you are supposed to put the total value of all parent 529s, right? The reason that they want you to do that is because it's very easy to change the beneficiary, right? So theoretically, if they only had you put the beneficiary, you could change the beneficiary every 6 months. If you had an older child, you could change the beneficiary to the younger child and basically take that off the table. So the rule is they want you to put all 529s for the entire family, right? Again, that's the rule. That's the letter of the law. Let me put it that way. If that's your situation, I'd highly recommend booking a consultation and we could talk a little bit more about your specific situation. Guys, once again, thanks a lot for coming out tonight. Wish you all the best. You'll get an email tomorrow with the recording, with the slides. Everyone take care. Have a great night.